Welcome to this instructional video related to competency-based programs. My name is Madeleine Bazergi from the Office of Academic Development at Dawson College, and I'm pleased to present why, when, what, and how are you assessing? The evaluation of student learning is a fundamental part of an educational process contributing to student success and to the certification of studies. Evaluation is a professional act of primary importance given the decisions and consequences that result from it. Students are motivated to study for and learn from assessment, and teachers attest to student success in courses, but also improve teaching from the results of assessments. And finally, the college certifies that students have succeeded by issuing a diploma. In this presentation, we ask 4 important questions. Why are you assessing? What are you assessing? When will the assessment take place? And what role does your course play in the overall development of a competency in a program? And finally, what means will you use? How will you assess student learning? There are a few reasons for assessing or evaluating student learning. In the literature, they use the term assessment to mean monitoring and measuring progress, and evaluation to mean making a final judgment on learning. I will use the terms interchangeably, but you will know what I mean from the context. You may want to assess students for prior skill and knowledge when they first start your class. This is called a diagnostic assessment, asking students to identify the different fruits and vegetables or illustrate the food pyramid will allow you to gauge the level of knowledge and skill for the purpose of informing your pedagogy. If you want to take the pulse on student learning during your course, you would use formative assessments. These mini assessments for learning engage students in their own learning from the feedback they receive and may signal whether adjustments need to be made to teaching or to learning. If, on the other hand, it is time to measure student learning for the purpose of determining success in a course or the achievement of a competency or set of competencies, a high-stakes, summative/comprehensive assessment is appropriate. In competency-based programs, evaluation serves not only to measure learning and assign a grade, but also to ensure that students have the knowledge and skills for the next level of learning, or at the end of a learning period, developing a competency or set of competencies to attest to their achievement. Once you identify why you are assessing or evaluating student learning, the next question is, what are the objects of assessment? What are you assessing in your courses that are part of a program defined by competencies? Is it knowledge? Of course. You need to make sure students have a good foundation before proceeding to the next level of learning, and you may want to conduct a formative assessment. What about skills? Well, yes, you will teach them how to perform an injection, how to chop up vegetables, how to communicate or think critically, or even perform mathematical operations. And do we evaluate attitudes? Well, yes to that too. You will be educating future citizens. And what about competency? Well, yes to that too. In competency-based programs, we don't just evaluate knowledge, skills, and attitudes, but we also put students through an evaluation activity that requires them to mobilize the knowledge, skills, and attitudes in order to solve a complex problem or perform a complex task. We want to require students to exercise competencies. So we also directly or indirectly make a judgment on the achievement of competency. So when and how do we do all of this? Let's quickly recall a definition of competency. Competency is an ability to perform a complex task or solve a complex problem based on the effective mobilization and combination of a variety of internal and external resources within a family of situations. Competencies are these: in action. This is what we teach, this is what we encourage, and this is what we adapt our teaching to. We're all familiar with evaluating knowledge, skills, and attitudes, but what does it mean to evaluate competency? What are we evaluating when we evaluate competency? Well, we evaluate this in action. A competency is a person's ability to act. When we evaluate competency, we evaluate the integration of learning. For example, if we were to evaluate a student for the purpose of attesting to the achievement of a cooking competency, then we must require that the chef make something. Here, a soup. Not answer questions about soup making or explain how they made the soup. Answering questions about making a soup or lasagna does not allow you to attest to the chef's competency. In this example, we're evaluating the results of exercising the competency. Was the workplace clean? Was the soup tasty? Was it nutritious? The presentation appealing? Did the chef check on the client? Was the chef professional in their interactions? Did the chef design an original soup? And to truly evaluate competency, not only are we evaluating results, but we evaluate the process. Did the chef plan the workspace and the ingredients? Did the chef work efficiently and effectively? And was the chef responsive to others in the kitchen? At the end of a course, you really don't need to evaluate if the chef remembers the food pyramid. That was just part of the chef's foundational knowledge, most likely verified with a formative assessment at the very beginning of the learning process. Let's continue with a fictitious example of a competency from a nursing program. The following conceptual framework works for both technical and pre-university programs, although it could get a bit more challenging in technical programs when several competencies are developed in the same course. So, what are the objects of learning and assessment? In a nursing program, we evaluate knowledge. Students must acquire knowledge of anatomy and pathologies as a foundation for work in the occupation. We also evaluate individual skills. Students must be able to give an injection or tend to a wound and approach clients with appropriate attitudes. We evaluate those as well. But at the end of a learning period that develops a competencies, student must be able to put it all together in a rather complex situation. Competency is the ability to act, to apply what was learned to new situations. As teachers in competency-based programs, we assess or evaluate student progress towards competency mastery. It may take one or many courses to get there, but at the end of a learning period, requiring the student to exercise the competency in a situation representative of the occupation will enable the teacher to make a judgment on the achievement of competency. What do we mean by knowledge, skills, and attitudes? And what is the relationship between what we normally call content or material and competency? In both technical and pre-university programs, knowledge is characterized by the facts, concepts, theories, principles, models pertaining to the discipline. And skills in technical programs are usually the procedures, techniques, methods, and for example, in pre-university programs, they're the cognitive or metacognitive processes such as critical thinking and problem solving. Attitudes are the ethics, morals, and values appropriate to the exercise of the competency in the occupation or for the pursuit of studies or the next level of life. By content, most teachers mean the course material, what they teach in class. When we adopt a student-centered approach, especially in competency-based programs, instead of referring to content, we like to refer to knowledge, skills, and attitudes that students will acquire or build upon. It's a different way of looking at education. Rather than focusing on chapters 1 to 15 of a book, The focus is on the development of the student. If we replace the word content with learning activities that develop, as in this graphic, our mindset changes, and so does the focus of our evaluations. So, what's the relationship to competency? Well, the knowledge, the skills, and the attitudes are the building blocks of the competency. Here's another example from a pre-university program. In this example, we have a course that will develop the student's ability to explain patterns of human behavior and mental processes from a psychological perspective. This competency is either at the understanding or analysis level of Bloom's taxonomy, depending on the objectives and standards. Let's assume it's at the analysis level. The big question here is, do I want this course to be only knowledge-based, or are there skills I wish students to develop? In competency-based programs, the knowledge and skills to be developed will be informed from the objectives and standards. In this example, not only do I want students to learn about thinking, memory, motivation, disorders, cognitive biases, but I also want them to be able to gather and classify information, recognize patterns and links, paraphrase texts, etc. The skills section for pre-university programs can be a challenge to elaborate, but it forces us to think about the cognitive or metacognitive skills we wish our students to develop. These skills then become the objects of teaching, learning, and evaluation. We can't expect all our students to become critical thinkers on their own. By making critical thinking an object of instruction, we intentionally develop more than just knowledge in the discipline. Evaluation in competency-based programs requires more than the evaluation of individual compartments. It involves the mobilization of knowledge, skills, and attitudes to meet the complex demands of society. Disciplinary knowledge and skill is important as the raw material, but competency is the capacity to connect the dots, to integrate learning. And this is what we are evaluating when we are ready to attest to the achievement of a competency. In fact, I would go as far as saying that competency and integration are synonymous. I often get the question, does the summative assessment need to include content from the whole course, from all the courses, or the entire program in the case of the comprehensive examination? And the answer is no. In competency-based programs, it's not about content. Summative does not mean adding up all the parts of the course. It really means summary or capstone. I would go as far as to say that a summative assessment is really about evaluating the integration of learning. Competency development takes time. Either it takes 45 hours or 200 hours. So not every assessment requires students to exercise a competency at the entry level to the occupation or for the pursuit of university studies as defined by the performance criteria. There must be a way to attest to the achievement of a competency at a certain point in time, either during a course or a series of courses. Ideally, the student will be given many opportunities to exercise the competency at introductory and intermediate levels as they progress towards mastery. To determine how you will assess student learning also depends on when you are assessing. We learned in another video that formative assessments are conducted during a learning period for the purpose of assessing student progress and offering feedback. And summative assessments are conducted at the end of a learning period to measure learning and ensure knowledge for the next skill level. But how long is a learning period after which we can conduct a summative or high-stakes assessment? It could be up to the end of a unit, to the midterm, to the end of a course, or a learning period could be to the end of a series of courses or to the end of a program. The Commission d'évaluation de l'enseignement collégial says that all final course evaluations must be evaluating the integration of learning. At Dawson College, we have called this the summative assessment. When a competency is developed over several courses, the last course in the series is called the terminal course. At this time, the activities that help develop student competency are terminated, and the student should be ready to demonstrate the achievement of relevant competency. It becomes a challenge when this course is terminal for a competency, but not for others, and this is because of the way the program was designed. In this case, the question comes back to, what are you assessing in the final evaluation? And also, what allows you to attest to the achievement of the competency? Is it passing all the courses in the series of courses, or is there a separate evaluation to determine that the competency has been achieved? And finally, at the end of a program, the comprehensive examination is also summative in nature, and it evaluates the integration of learning in the program and attests to the achievement of the set of competencies. I often get the question, can a midterm be a summative assessment? And my personal answer is, why not? Yes, as long as substantial learning has taken place, keeping in mind that a summative assessment is a high-stake assessment for the purpose of measuring learning up to a certain point in time, either for the next level of study or for certification purposes, such as evaluating the mastery of a competency whose development terminates in a course, but perhaps not at the end of a course. Let's examine the issue of a course developing multiple competencies. The Introduction to Nursing course supports the development of several competencies, one of which is fully developed by that course. We say that the intro course is terminal for the competency 01Q0. Notice that the other competencies are general, such that they can be applied across many different situations throughout the program, and so they are developed in several other courses in different situations. In this course, students are expected to perform at an introductory level. There is another competency this course contributes to developing, 01QE. It reflects intervention procedures. In fact, it subsumes some of the general competencies developed in this course. For example, element 2 of the intervention competency actually relates to making assessment of the client, but this is the entire 01Q4 competency. This intervention competency reflects the integration of the other general competencies. In a future program revision, I would probably recommend to remove this course competency relationship as it is a bit redundant, and instead assign it to clinical courses where students integrate learning and the achievement of other competencies. So 01Q0, the competency, analyze the work functions, and in most programs analyze the occupation, is typical of all technical programs, and it is to be achieved in this course. It's a competency that enables the pursuit of the program. Students analyze the occupation and hopefully decide to stay in the program. It can be assigned to be developed independently in its own course, but programs rarely do so. So, what does the evaluation of student learning look like in this course when you have a competency that terminates, its development terminates in that course, and so we must attest to its achievement, and there are other competencies that are developed partially? Well, a department could decide that at the midterm point, students are ready to demonstrate 01Q0 in an assessment. For example, they can write a paper and present their viewpoint on the nursing occupation. Remember that you're not evaluating competency directly. You're inferring mastery of the competency by evaluating the work they turn in or the task they have to perform. The assessment can be considered summative, even if it's at a midterm point, because it requires the integration of learning up to that point in time. And it also serves to attest to the achievement of that competency. So what about everything else? Well, at the end of the course, another summative assessment could measure the integration of learning for the other partially developed competencies. Rather than asking questions on exam to verify learning of knowledge and skill, I would most likely put students in a situation where they need to assess the client, 01Q4, leveraging the knowledge and skill developed in communication, pharmacology, ethics, and the nursing practice. All other assessments would be formative, leading the student to this final evaluation where they get to integrate the learning that has been acquired so far. The Intro to Nursing course is not the only course developing 01Q4, use assessment and nursing care procedures. This competency is developed over the entire program in 6 courses, where each course develops some or all of the elements of the competency, culminating in the last course developing only one element related to assessing a patient's autonomy. The big question now becomes, has the student mastered the competency because they have passed all 6 courses and been evaluated analytically, or must the last course evaluate the competency integrally? The answer to that question rests with the department faculty, who can decide the best way to attest to the achievement of this competency depending on the development and evaluation model adopted. But it can get more complex because competencies are usually not exercised in isolation. What do we do when we have situations where a course is terminal for some, but not all of the competencies? The answer is simple, but the process is a challenge. The answer is writing learning outcomes. If you, the department, and the program are clear about what you want your students to know and be able to do after a certain learning period, like a course, it will be easier to align your assessments, your learning activities, with the competencies to be developed. We will address this challenge in another video and make the link between objectives and standards, the course learning outcomes, and the final course evaluations or summative assessments. Before we go, we have one more question to answer. How are you assessing? Once you answer why, what, and when you are assessing and understand the role your course plays in the overall program, you'll have more clarity on the type of assessment most appropriate to assess and evaluate student progress and learning and to attest to the achievement of competencies. There are many methods and instruments to choose from. Just keep in mind the objects of evaluation, and in the case of evaluating or attesting to the achievement of competency, on the taxonomic level of the competency. Thanks for your attention, and please stay tuned for the next presentation.